Hello, this is Isabel Litzler. I see 7 of you are on right now. So I'll get started to be sharp for people that are coming right on target. So you should have a link on your screen right now that says if you want to ask questions, you just click on that link, but I'll keep repeating that for newcomers. So let's get started. My name is Isabel Litzler. Some of you know me. I've worked most of my life as an HR manager. I started my career in Los Angeles, California, then Paris, and more recently Switzerland. So I've always worked with talent management, so recruitment, training, delivering programs for organizations on high potential and things like that. And last year I opened business for myself, doing career coaching, career planning, and the service is actually twofold. There's a private coaching service for people who are looking to change jobs or who want to do a skills assessment or who just want to start a company. Maybe it's the right time for them. And I also do events, and these events can be meetups, they can be breakfasts, etc. So I try to launch meetups on a regular basis. So about you, probably you're in a situation right now where you're thinking, I like my job, but something's missing, or you don't like your job and you definitely need to find a solution. Or maybe you get to that stage also in your life where you say, I'd like to do something different. I know I have talents and I like what I do. I can do it well, but I'm not passionate about it and I'd like to find my passion. And I think it's important. So this webinar is the right place for you, and I'm glad you joined. So before I get started in the actual content, I wanted to give you a little bit of statistics because I think it's interesting for the topic we're talking about today, which is changing careers and changing jobs. I looked at 3 countries basically that are European countries. The first one is Switzerland. So the statistics I found by the training organization in Switzerland is really that 1 out of 2 people will change jobs at least once in their life. And that's recent. So probably the figure will increase also in the future. Same thing in France with the AFPA, also the Training Institute. The figure is going to 60% of employees or working population will change jobs. And in the UK, the figure turns to 47% by the London Business School study. So really, we can see consistent that probably half of the population will change jobs. And I'm expecting this figure to increase a little bit in the future. So that gives you a message also that for this change happening, you have to be prepared for it. So people have to be on board that probably they will have a career change. So the sooner they anticipate it, the better equipped they will be to embrace that change. So now going on our webinar. So the way I want to talk about this is really to give you some type of reflection that you should have on this webinar. And then we talk about the steps that you should take to change careers. And finally, I give you some tips. So again, for people who are joining in a little bit later, if you want to ask questions, you click on the link on the video and you should have a Rubik's Cube on top where you can ask questions, and they should appear here on my right-hand side and I should be able to cover. For whatever reason, if it doesn't work, no worries. There's Meetup. And what happened last time is people asked questions on Meetup and I was able to answer, or you can also contact me in person and I will answer your questions. Also, I've put the link of my, if you can view that, I put the link of my website where you can also contact me there. So first of all, what reflection you should have now if you're in a situation where you're thinking, I'd like to change jobs, I'm not really sure how to do this. Well, the thing that probably most consultants don't necessarily talk about when they do skills assessment, and I find that it's quite important, it's the fact, is there a market for what you want to do? I mean, we can probably do a long skills assessment and realize you're a great person and you should be wonderful in marketing. And maybe where you live, if it's a small town in the middle of nowhere, there's not going to be a market for you to sell your skills. So I think that's the first thing, is really wherever you're sitting right now, if it's Geneva, is there a market for the type of job you'd like to do? Because that's number one to me. Can you make money basically if you go into this field? The other thing that is also very specific to Geneva, actually, and Switzerland, I would say in general, is it a market of specialists or generalists? So, for example, in Switzerland, if you look at job boards, they're mostly looking for specialists. So people who have been trained in a field and understand the technical side. So it's harder for profiles, and because my target, or really the people I work with and have expertise with, are expats. If you went to the United States or the UK in your career, maybe over there you're used to the change being a little bit easier within companies and fields, etc. In Switzerland, they tend to hire people that have worked in similar patterns, so it makes it also more of a challenge. So that's the number 2. Number 3 is, what is your network like right now? Do you have people that you can go to that can also give you advice? That's another thing I find very useful in terms of career change. Who could you lean on if you were to make that jump? Do you already know some people? And I also address that when I work with people who want to start a business. How is your network? Do you have people you can go to that can actually help you find clients? If you're saying, I know nobody and I have no idea how to get clients, already this part is going to be important, the commercial aspect. And the last thing is really, did I speak to anyone in the profession that I'm targeting? I mean, sometimes we have a dream of a profession or a job, and then when we talk to people in the field, we realize, well, it's not really what I expected. And I see that happening actually more often than not. There's images that people have with different professions where they think, well, it's great. And I'm thinking marketing, because that's one that comes to mind, where people think it's an exciting, glamorous job. But there's also the analytical sides with figures and reporting, etc., that might not be as glamorous. So, or depending on your profile. So you have to take into account everything in the job. So these are some of the preliminary thinking before you even start any type of change. The other food for thought is really to think about your resume right now and what you've done, because changing can be a good thing. And I think more recently employers are used to that. With the younger generation, probably they will be used to having people that have done many internships, many short-term positions. But still, there needs to be, and I think that's the value of my background, because I've worked in human resources many years, is really consistency should be the key word. So it's okay to change fields or to change jobs, but somehow there has to be some type of a line in your resume where we understand the changes. So I'm thinking, someone was maybe in the background and now wants to learn more about the front end or the selling part. That would be a logical change, or, where we can see there's growth going on. But people would just change and there's some inconsistency in the resume that will be harder to sell to an employer. So these are things that maybe you don't necessarily think about, but that will be essential. Also, and of course, we can't keep our eyes closed on that one. The part you are in your career obviously is important. When you're younger, you have probably less charges in terms of commitments. So if you make big changes, it won't impact so much your life. When you get to a more seniority and you're settled in life, or you become the main breadwinner in the family, your decisions will have an impact in the family. So all this needs to be taken into account. And also your market potential past a certain age varies as well. So all these things obviously will have some importance. But I would say it's really also about your conviction. If you really think that you're meant for a particular field and for a job, and I talked to a few people recently, they have something really deep inside that tells them this is what I want to do, I think you should definitely follow your passion and what you want, as long as you make the right checks and the right reflections. So before I move to the next part of the presentation, is there some questions on what I've just discussed, or things that you have in your mind right now? So I don't see any questions popping on the right-hand side. Again, it's on the Rubik's Cube. You just submit a question, but I don't see it on the right-hand side. So I have some questions I prepared that I think could help you as well, because I think they would be typical questions that people may have. So the first one is, How does HR in Switzerland view career change? I think that's a very typical question I get. So as I was saying earlier, consistency is the key word. So if you have a resume where you showed why you're changing fields, maybe it's a natural transition from one job to another, then human resources will understand it. If it becomes a little bit less consistent, you would really need to build up your resume, and it's a little bit like a story you have to make on a resume. And that's also where I help people. Everyone has a certain background, and we have to live with it. I mean, there's no need in trying to make something that is not real. So you have to work with your background and the challenges, but also the opportunities. Maybe you did some interesting things, but how do you present all that story so that it's convincing? And really, it's what it's about. It's how do you pitch your story to an employer? Why should they hire you? So you have to make sense of your resume before you apply. So it's not when you're in front of the employer. You have to build that story so that people understand why you made the change and what value you would bring to them. So in that sense, HR would be understanding of it. The other question that I think some of you may have is, when do we think that changing career, when is the right timing for changing career, and when does it happen? It really depends on the individual. I see it probably happening in two stages in life. It's students who made the wrong decision and they realize it quite fast. They've done maybe a bachelor's or a degree in something they don't like, and then they want to change immediately to something else. It happened to me at the beginning. I was going more towards public relations, and then I ended up in human resources. And then it would be probably around the age of 40 or early 40s, when people have a background in something and they know their job very well, they're comfortable with it, but they just need to do something else. And it's also, a career is quite long, so at some point you say, I know I can do other things and I'd like to change. So these are probably the two times when you would change. Another thing that probably you're wondering is, would a degree such as an MBA boost my career and help with the change of career? My realization so far, or to date, is that basically your certificates or your diplomas only help you if it's linked to a project. But just having the degree of its own, it's not going to be that relevant. And nowadays, everyone goes for training, and training is getting more and more of a used to boost the career, but it's not as easy, because in the past it used to be only a few people had masters and it was a real value. Nowadays everyone goes for masters, even PhD, so it can't be a differentiator of its own. I think it has to be linked to a project. I want to do an MBA because I plan on leading teams and being a head of a function, and it's something I'm missing, maybe certain pieces. And you have to have a real plan, because you're going to be far away from the workspace sometimes for a while. And how do you get back in once you leave? That becomes the problem I faced with some clients. They thought they were boosting their career by doing a master's, and they had the hardest time getting back in the workforce. They were far away from the network for a while, out of touch, out of sight, out of mind. And then they had to work like crazy to get back in contact with the network and find a job. So think about that also in terms of degrees. I always tell people, before we talk about training, let's look at what your project is, and maybe it doesn't even require much training. Okay, which steps should you take if you want to change careers? Well, it means you need to be ready to prepare your profile. And by that, I mean, what I see happen is that people take their old resume and they just maybe put a title on top, or send it immediately to their network or to employers. That's not going to be very effective. So you have to say, okay, I'm changing careers or I'm changing jobs. That means probably I'm changing companies. It's going to be a different culture, different everything. So I need to build up, same thing, I need to build up a story. So that's going to be important. Oh, I see something. I'm glad that it's working, maybe. Okay, I'm glad I see the question. Yeah. I wanted to know what are the best tools to be able to change a career? Well, it's actually linked to what I was saying. So training could be the answer. It could be a tool to boost the career, but not necessarily. It's going to take you potentially away from the workplace. It's usually taking a long time, even though now they have more and more online training that can help you, but it takes a long time. So I see another thing. Would that be the internship or school? Yes, it could be, again, same thing. It could be an internship or it could be school, but I think it's mostly what people are looking for, what employers are looking for is practical knowledge and soft skills. That's what I was looking for when I was recruiting, and that's what my colleague managers were looking for. We want doers come in and they can just have an idea of what needs to be done. So schooling is the base. You need to have a degree to show also that you have some competencies in the field. But in the end, it's also your can-do attitude. And it's really thinking through the issues of the organization. And that's something I really prepare people with. What value, what solutions are you bringing to an organization? So yes, you've got a degree, fantastic. But how are you going to work with the organization? Maybe you saw that they could develop their website a bit more. So it's thinking about solutions. And actually, I have someone right now helping me actually, and she's making a lot of suggestions. And I'm thinking, wow, this is the kind of employee that would be great, because she's already looking at my website and seeing things. And so this is so helpful when you're a manager, because you don't really have time when you're delivering service inside the organization and potentially outside with clients. So when you have staff, you need people that can say, hey, Isabel, you know what? We didn't understand anything in your last meeting. Can you help us? Can you give us more details? Wow, great feedback. Or Isabel, you need to maybe write a little bit more on this. So it's different things that you could do for an employee that can really help them. So if you're passionate about the topic, it's really just training yourself already on that topic. And if you already have a good profile, you know how to communicate, you know how to make connections with people. If you have these three things, in any career, you'll be successful. So it's just little, maybe tiny things, technical things you need to train on, but you'll be successful. So I see a question here about online courses. Yes, they're great because they're shorter than the full MBA, and they're actually more precise on what you need. So Udemy, I think, is a good one. It's definitely a good one. You just have to find the one that suits you. And the other thing is that I'm not sure they're all certified training, because I see the question, are they taken seriously? It's new. The whole online training field is very new. So if you don't have a certificate, it's probably good to show that you're doing something, especially if you're looking for work. Any training is better than not doing anything. So if you're showing you're engaging with training online, that's positive for an employer. Keeping in mind that you might not get a certification. So of course, if you want to become a project manager, for example, you will only have the credibility if you're certified for project management. And it's the case in many fields where you can't replace certification. But not all changes require a certification depending on what you're doing. So we would really have to look at what is the job and what does it require. Yeah, I see the MOOC. That's very recent. It's the same. It's online courses, open university courses. So all these for me would be complementary to your initial education. So again, you can show an employer you're actively taking your career seriously, and you're actively developing your skills. So you will have the certified or initial training type of things, and then you would have what's called other development or other training elements that you've put in your resume, and all that is positive. But of course, if you're making a huge change and it requires some real credentials, and I'm thinking, if you can become a doctor without certification, you can become, most jobs now require certification, so you really have to look into it. But if you're doing an internal move, maybe within an organization, that may not be necessary. It's more how you would sell yourself internally, and that's another type of thing. So if there's no more question on that one, I'll keep going. So I'll give you my 6 steps I've developed to go forward with your project. And of course, I'm welcome to hear your feedback on that. So the first thing for me, and it's interesting, I had this conversation also with someone in my network, and I think we agreed on that. The first thing is really, what do you want? It sounds very basic, but it's the base of success in anything in life. If you don't know what you want, then how are you going to find it? So I think people jump very quickly in pursuing things, but without asking the question, well, what do I want? What makes me happy in terms of my career or even my life? And when we look at people applying, for example, they apply to different organizations, and I think you will have so much more impact if you come to an interview and the employer or HR or anyone that's interviewing you can say, wow, this person is really here because that's where they want to be, not because the job was open and they applied. So you'll be much more powerful if you've done this little internal search, soul search, to find out what you want. And then you can be more convincing. If you convince yourself, you convince other people. So that's why I think that section on assessment is really important, and that's why I do it with my clients, the self-assessment, because then they can, first of all, they can be comfortable about their change. That's something they really wanted. And also they're pursuing the right thing. You know, they're not just trying to go in every direction and posting for jobs everywhere. So really the first one is, what is your DNA? What are you about? What do you want? Then once you know what you want, the second step is really to position yourself. So, okay, I figured now I want to be a marketing specialist. That's my thing. That's what I love to do. Well, how am I going to position myself? And I use this example to give a little bit clarity on the topic. So if you're a marketing specialist, for example, of course you want to have a great resume that looks like you're a marketing specialist. Of course you want to have a great online profile, because that's what you're selling, you know, your marketing skills. So that's why I think it's important in terms of positioning. It has to reflect your choice of career or your new project. So spend some time in thinking about where would you, for example, and that gets in a little bit into the job search strategy there, but where would the people you're looking for be? Where would they advertise or look for if they needed staff? Where would they advertise? How would you meet these people? So that's the positioning part. The third one, which to me plays more and more of an important role, is really about networking. So you know what you want, you're well positioned. That means you have a great resume, potentially a business card. And now you have to find a network with the right people that can open their network, and you can get opportunities that way. So that's also something that some people don't really have much of a network. So you need to find the right areas where you can meet with people. I have a listing on that where you can actually do some networking in Geneva, what type of events. But before you go to events, you will need to work on these presentation skills I was saying earlier. That's what's going to help you develop your competencies as well. So working on presentation skills, pitching, how do you introduce your skills when you meet people, or what kind of image will they have about you? So all this is something that I don't see necessarily being worked on necessarily in my experience, either in consulting firms or working with individuals on job search, or maybe not enough time is spent on that. But that's going to be important, especially based on what you're looking for. So of course, if you're looking for a job in corporate, you need to represent that. Maybe if you work in, more of a volunteers or in an association, then it's different. But you have to think about what kind of people are you targeting in your network and look a little bit like them. So I think that's important. People like to be surrounded by people like them. It sounds very basic again as a comment, but if you want to become, for example, if you want to get to higher levels in senior management, I used to have this with my my manager when I worked in California. I was working very hard, and I started as an HR assistant in my career. And that was always something in the back of my mind. Well, how do people get to the next level? Why are certain people promoted and not others? So that's in my videos, actually in my online training. I've drawn some conclusions on that, on what you need to do, and it took me a little while to understand the dynamics inside organization. But the appearance and how you project yourself with others is going to be very important. You'll be placed in several categories. You will have people that they're good at what they do, but you can't really see them as promotion material. So I have this background because I worked in human resources, so I know how the selection process and the promotion process and all these different things is quite interesting. So you need to think about, how do you position yourself in your network to be credible, so that people think about you if there's a job opening or a promotion going on, etc., etc. So that's going to be important. And the other mistake I see that people make sometimes is that they contact the network in such a way that it doesn't make the network want to respond. So I see two mistakes. The first one is really to be too blunt about what you want. Well, I'm looking for a job. Do you have anything? Or do you know anyone hiring? And I know some of my colleagues also get those kinds of emails of people saying, I'm looking for work. Do you have anything? And that's not really, first of all, that's not very professional. And second of all, even if people do, they probably won't think about you. I mean, the people that I've worked with as my staff or in my department, they're usually people that have worked their way through. So because they built trust with you and because they showed that they were credible, you would want to give them more, whether it's promotion or even recruitment. So I'm thinking, that's something that people need to be aware of, and maybe they're not. They don't realize they're too blunt. So the way to reach out to the network is really to be more on an inquiry mode. Well, I heard you're a specialist in this field. Would you have some time, maybe 15 minutes on the telephone to exchange with me on the topic? So it's really asking people in a nice way if they have some time for you. And probably it's all about patience as well. It might not bring you immediately a position, but people will remember you. People tend to remember people that were nice, that were polite, and that did not think about what they want immediately, but more about, let's talk about more of an exchange. So it's really how you deal with networking is going to be important. And I do a lot around that topic. The next one I really like because it's my favorite. It's the non-typicals. And I think some of you might think about that. Am I a typical or not typical? Oh, I see some questions popping. When you got our own company, I'm trying to read the full question here. Sorry. So let's see the question. When you got your own company, but you want to close it and work for a bigger one in the same field, how you communicate that? Well, communication plan. I mean, in a nutshell, it would be hard for me to say any change needs to be a story. If you have a good story, people will buy into it, and a story that's also authentic. I think if you can explain things in a nice way, in a logical way, I think employees can understand, for example, that maybe you had a business at some point, and you lost your clients, crisis, and you ended up, having to close shop, and now you're looking for work. And people can understand that, if you explain it and they believe you. Or you could have worked for a company and as you say, you want to work for a different one, bigger one, etc. Same thing. As long as they see that you're a good person, you have a work ethic, and you understand your business, you're good in your skills, you can always make the changes. But it's really building the story so that people can understand. So step number 4, non-typicals. So these people are usually the type of people I was talking about a little bit earlier. So people that have worked maybe in several jobs and they have great experiences, but nothing really particular. So especially in Switzerland, you would have to build something that you could focus on. So if your market is going to be, okay, there's banking, there's international organizations, there's watch sector, where do I position myself? I could do probably something around that, but I don't know what. So it's really looking at all your skills and target on specific ones that you say, okay, this is really what I'm interested in. And now I will try to build something towards that. And and address it with the network. So it is possible. You just have to think about what are you going to become. You have to become a specialist in something. So pick one of the things that you've done and maybe dig deeper into that one. So I'm thinking about someone recently who told me about wanting to dig more into digital marketing. I think now with all the different things you can learn online, for example, if you were a generalist and you've done a little bit of marketing here and there and you've done other things, well, you can say, you know what, I'm going to really, really become a specialist in one specific area in digital marketing, maybe do a training on that and work in a sector for a while. And then that's it. That's going to be the field that you develop. But you have to be sure before, because you can't keep changing every few years. So that's what I was saying. At some point, it's good to make a decision, become a specialist in something, but you have to have made that decision, because otherwise, same thing, the credibility, people see you become a different specialist every 3 years, then it becomes a problem. The fifth step for me is really about your personality. You can be the greatest specialist, very technical, very good at what you do. And I've worked with people like this. They were excellent professionals, but they were horrible people, and no one wanted to work for them. And that's an issue, because nowadays you need to have both. You need to be credible, you need to have knowledge, but you also need to be a person that people enjoy working with. They enjoy getting up in the morning and spending time with you. In a company, you have to work in teams, you have to share information. So I think it's really understanding, well, I have a personality, I can bring some things also to my colleagues, and I want to share information. So it's really going at it from a very open perspective. And I think that's changing also a little bit with the newer newcomers, the younger generations. It used to be when I started working, I know people were working in silos and everyone was a specialist in their field and no one really shared much information. I remember the times when people said, well, you don't need to know about this. This is not your field. And I was always very curious. I'm interested in a lot of things. So I remember when I was a young professional, I got rejected many times, like stay in your turf and don't ask questions. I think younger people now are more open. So there's more openness and people are sharing information. So I think that the senior people amongst us can embrace this also as a way to get into a culture, a company culture. You know, we really work with others and show that you have an easygoing personality. Because in the end, it could happen now that you apply for a position and your manager is going to be someone much younger, who just started maybe not so long ago. So they need to feel reassured that if you work with them, the chemistry will work fine. So that's why I think really addressing, you know, how is my personality fitting in? You know, what can I bring as an individual? Maybe I'm more senior, but that doesn't mean they won't hire me. I just have to show that I can be part of the team. So that's important. Again, when you're talking with people in your networking events and telling your life story or your career story, it's really making sure people understand where you're coming from. And that's why communication skills also are important. That's why I don't tell people when they talk about pitching, I don't think it's a story fits it all. So each time you meet someone, you say the same story. You will meet different people. So some really like, they're very data driven. So they like short sentences and they don't want to be bothered too much. Other people are more on the emotional level. So you need to reach out to their, you know, be interested in them first, really listen to their story, and then only you can talk about what you do. So I've seen really all kinds of people in networking, and I wasn't really doing much networking myself when I was in human resources. And only when I switched and now I have my own business, I do a lot more. So I met a lot more people, a lot more personalities within events. And I learned that you can't have just, you know, one speech prepared. So to say, when you talk to people, you really have to go at it as I want to get to know people, offer them value, and then it becomes much easier. But I'll talk about that in my next webinar. It's a very interesting topic. So yeah, presentation skills will help you. And my sixth step, which I think is important if you're going to change, if you're going to start a business now, if you're going to change careers, is to be tenacious. It's going to be tough, let's face it. I think anyone that will say the opposite is wrong. I think, you know, we're already competitive when we're going for a job with a huge background and knowledge in the field and a network in the field. So if you're someone that changed and you don't have as much of a network and you just trained yourself in the new field, you're starting from ground zero, it's going to take a lot of energy and a lot of passion to actually get that first interview and even eventually get hired. So you will have challenges, potentially also rejections, but it's always keeping in mind that if it's really what you want and you can go back to that choice that you made to change fields, you can make it, but it's going to be a lot of internal motivation. I like that topic also of internal motivation because I think in career it's very important. When you're dealing with different markets as well, some of you are new to Switzerland, the culture also plays a role. So if you don't understand the culture at the beginning, you might be a bit disappointed or stressed because you don't really understand why it's not working and why you're not getting the interview. So that's why keeping the motivation is important. And it's something that's, to me, that's growing. I mean, at the beginning, you probably don't understand so much why you're rejected. And then after a while, you improve. You say, okay, I understand this is how I need to do it for the next time. So if you keep going at it and you keep improving and you understand a little bit more what's expected in the job, then you can really finally at the end hopefully sign the contract. But it's going to take a little bit of time. And I will be doing videos with some of my clients. One already did one last week, Iliska, because I want to show people, the career changers especially, that it is possible. You just have to put energy in it, believe in your project, but it is possible to change careers. So before I move, any more questions? Now I'm happy that I can see questions on my screen. So the last one I have appearing is about the mock. I don't have anything else. Okay, so I've answered, I think, all the ones on the screen. Well, you can always ask questions anyway. One that I get, and I'll address that one before I move to the next thing. If I have a non-typical profile, can I still get a job in Switzerland? The answer is it really depends on you and how you will activate the 6 steps I just mentioned. So if you're someone who's extremely motivated, you have a great personality, and I just think of someone who came back from Canada, from Quebec, and she was extremely motivated in her job search. She was looking for work, I believe, in the analytical field. Working in the academic world, I believe. She was a professor, extremely motivated, no network in Switzerland, no knowledge of the market, but great personality and great motivation. And she found a job, and I believe within 2 or 3 months. So that shows also it is possible, but you have to go a little bit beyond your comfort zones. I mean, she was calling people and really trying to make a good impression, and it worked actually. So sometimes going a little bit outside of the typical way can be good. And we worked on it together, actually. She just asked me some questions, and I told her, yes, this is the right way of doing it. And it worked in the end. But yeah, so the answer to that question, I think some of you might be worried about that. It's possible. So now moving on to giving you some tips. It's always good to have some tips on how to change careers. Tip number 1, understand the language of your targets. I see that going on, especially changes from private to more the international organization and vice versa. We live in a bubble. I mean, when you work for a big company in the private sector, and I'm thinking about the big companies out there, when you speak a certain language, I even see people talk, they don't even use the full words. It's give me the SMM or the MPP, and people talk like this all the time. You become used to that and you think it's normal language when other people have no clue what you're talking about. And in HR, we're very good at that, having our own acronyms and words that no one understand around us. And I think it's the case in any profession, same thing with finance and same thing with other things. So understand really the language. By that, I mean, if you're going to apply for not-for-profit and you worked in commercial sector, if you're going to have on your resume things such as revenue, increasing profits, and this is not going to be efficient. People won't understand really what you did. So you have to apply that to the not-for-profit sector. You know, in your header or in your profile, talk about what's important to this type of organizations. They're building partnerships. They are looking for donors. So these words probably don't seem clear to you if you've never worked in international organizations, but over there we talk about donors, we talk about fundraising. So it's really getting an understanding of the field you're going to apply for as well, and understanding the words that they use. Where you can get some good information is on the job description. So when you're interested in a field, look at job descriptions, look at what they mention on there, and then you can do more research online by looking at the different organizations and how they work. But really building knowledge is what's going to get you, that's what's going to get some interest out of the person you're targeting. If you can show that you have skills that can help them, then they will be listening to you. And that's what happens to me every day. When I have people approaching me and they have certain skills, definitely I will look at them and say, you know, this person is bringing me value. So therefore, first of all, I will be appreciative, because definitely we're not gurus in everything. So that's the number one value for me as the employer. And the second value is that I may not have a job opening, but if someone is showing me how they can help me and all the knowledge that they have, either I will think of them immediately if I have an opening, or best, I will want my network to benefit from this person's knowledge, because they're wonderful and they have so much knowledge. So think about that when you're preparing your application, is really understanding the language of your target. The second one is to focus on your new project. And that can be actually quite difficult for people who lost their job, and meaning it was not voluntary. So I've met a lot of professionals, and that was always a bit difficult for me at the beginning of the sessions, because they worked hard many years for an organization. They were part of the culture, and I'm talking about 10 years, 15, 20 years in an organization. So they were so attached to the culture, and you know, they became even friends probably with most of their colleagues. And all of a sudden, you know, big change in the organization, you lose your job. It was definitely not voluntary, and you end up on the job market. You don't have a network because you haven't built it. And because it wasn't voluntary, you're very nostalgic of that time, and you want to keep thinking about it. You keep meeting the colleagues and talk about the good times. And for these people, it's harder for them to move on to the next phase. So there's, of course, a period where you need to really think about all those good times and remember that it was a great experience. But at some point, you have to move on to the new project, and the employer needs to see that when they meet you. So if you go to an interview and all you talk about is your ex-employer and how great they were and what you did for them, great, but what are you going to do for me? So so you really need to project yourself as, you know, now I'm interested in your company and your issues, and what value I can bring to you. So great, I worked 15 years for P&G, or I worked 15 years for a bank. But today, you know, this is what I'm focused on, and you don't talk so much about the past. That's a huge step for most people, because that's where they're comfortable, and I'm taking them to a place where they're not as comfortable, which is talking about something that's projecting them into the unknown. So so that's going to take a little bit of time, and still even the wording that you use, you'll probably still think in terms of what you were familiar with. So projecting yourself in a new world is not so easy, but that's something I work on as well, also on working on the resume. What type of wording you could use there, you know, how could you show that you're interested in this new organization? So the new project is going to be something to keep in mind. And the third tip I'll give you is really about going online and drafting a good profile. I mean, this whole world online is still quite new to most people I meet, because not so long ago, when we're looking for work, the main area was mostly job boards, or, you know, talking to people that you know, and what I call the traditional way of looking for work. And now with the online world, it opened up opportunities to actually go and present yourself under different light. So I see more and more people, and I find that very interesting, even that have double profiles. So maybe during the day, they're this finance person, and during the evening, they're a writer, for example, and maybe they have a book somewhere that people can download, or they support a cause, or they do photography or something you wouldn't even know. So I think people now can use the internet also to show their skills. So when you're going through your change of career, this could be a great step board for you also to move to that new project, because of course there's the potential retraining you have to do and developing your network, but using also the web to test whether your profile could have an impact. So for example, you decided you want to work for the international organizations, and you start maybe publishing some articles on things that that you're passionate about, and you start really building up your professional profile. Then people might say, I'm interested in this person. Let's see what they have to say. So using really the web to work for you, but I think people are not necessarily doing it at the right way, and now we're getting more into communication. They usually copy paste their resume online, and they do that for every tool that they use. So the resume that you have now is not going to help you necessarily for your new project, because it's completely new. So the fact that you've worked 15 years in an organization, as I was saying earlier, that's great. That's your credibility card that you've worked somewhere, but at the same time, now you need to show credibility for your new project. So really focusing on building a good online profile is going to be important. And I also advise people to stay focused on minimum one profile at the beginning, because if you start wanting to be everywhere, you'll probably have a hard time maintaining, or at least that was my experience with my clients, is that they would start somewhere and then they were a bit lost. And it's a real job to manage online profiles or social media, so to say. It's a real full-time job. So if you're not someone that for whom it's natural, I would say start with one, do it well, and start also looking at the results. And then if you see you become really interested and it's something you enjoy doing, then maybe you can open a second profile somewhere else. But really start with one. And the one for people in career, for me, is really LinkedIn, because that's where most people are. Of course, you can also do, if you have your own consultancy or profession, you can also open different pages. If you're in the creative sector, you can have Instagram, where you show your photos or things that you create. So there's different ways you can brand yourself online, but really for people who are staying in the corporate world, so to say, or the working world, LinkedIn is a good base. So, and please tell me what things you would be looking for in terms of training on social media, because I have people in my network that are quite competent, and I'm more than happy to organize a session on these tools. So Twitter, LinkedIn, this is something that I think some people would love to have a little bit more knowledge about. So going to my fourth tip now is about being selective. Being selective is quite important, I think, if you want to move ahead, because you will have potentially a lot of things to put on the resume. If you worked for many companies and you're now getting to 5, 6, 7 organizations, and you've done a wide array of things, you probably want to keep them on because you think it's my experience. I loved what I did for so many years. I know people that were really passionate about some of their experiences, but they dated back 20 years ago. So it's something you can keep inside of you. I mean, you know you love that time. I had also some great work experiences quite a long time ago, but I'm not going to push that forward on my resume because it's old. And now people want to see new stuff. They want to see what you did recently. So it's really the way we are right now. We want the fresh stuff. I mean, when we go online, we want to see the freshest information and the newest function that's been added in. We're not really looking at archives. So think about it the same way. You know, no one is going to be interested in your old experiences on your resume. People want to see what you're doing now. What are you actively doing now? That's what's going to sell your resume. So you need to keep that in mind when you build your resume and what type of experiences you want to put forward. So the last tip I will give you, and then open up again for some more questions, is really think about what is your career project right now, if you have one. Maybe you're thinking, but it's not clear yet. Try to find an answer to these things. What is your market potential in that project based on all the things I was talking about? What is your credibility? That's going to be also a selling point, you know. And to give you an example of credibility, what it means, I think for people to get into a sector, and I'm thinking consultants especially, because you have all kinds of consultants out there. I think you need to have some type of background where people feel you have an authority in it. So for example, I wouldn't feel comfortable becoming a tax accountant right now because I would have to learn so much about tax accounting and you know, all the different laws that are there, and I haven't worked in big organizations to really understand the mechanics of it. So that's what I mean with credibility. If you're going to target a sector where you don't have a background or you don't really know how it works, even if you get a degree in it, people will have a hard time. And I say the same thing to potential business owners. Yeah, I want to open a business in this field tomorrow. Well, what is your credibility in it? You need to show your employees that you've also done the groundwork. So I think that's important. That's something I would definitely think about. And that's also close to the knowledge of the field, which is the third element. What is your knowledge in the field that you're targeting? And maybe you've developed it on your own time. Maybe for many years you were doing photography, for example, as a hobby, and now you want to make it professional, but you've already worked quite a bit on the topic, and you went to a lot of conferences, you've met with other people, and you feel like now you're ready to get to that professional level. But at the beginning, you need to have some kind of entry point where people say, yes, it makes perfect sense that you would do this position. So that's what I would leave you with. So I'm checking the screen if because we still have a few minutes. So I'm open to answer your questions now. Otherwise, I have a few questions that I can share with you, which I think you will enjoy listening to the answers. The first one is, does Switzerland HR like one-page resume, two-page resume? What should be the ideal? I love that question, by the way. I think there's no one answer on that. It's really based on what you believe is right for your profile, going back to what I was saying, building your project. Of course, no one is going to read long resumes. I have a huge network in human resources and in companies, and I can tell you no one wants to see long resumes. People want to grasp quickly what you know, what you can do for them. Probably the trend is actually shorter is better now. I mean, and you see it in all kinds of communication, whether it's online, websites. Now, text tends to be reduced. People want to know right away the information. So unless you're a writer, and that's where you would actually put more text when you're a writer in your book. But if you're writing a resume is just like a bigger business card. So it's a little bit more than a business card. It needs to give enough to convince the person to want to meet you. But you don't want to write a full, again, the old experiences from 20 years ago. You want to keep that short, et cetera, et cetera. So try to limit and use the rule as less is better. How can I develop online recruitment visibility? I think that's linked to what I was just saying about online profiling and doing that in the right way so that you're visible. And building a right profile will be important also in terms of wording, because now everything is about Google searches and engines and keywords and all these things. And I know most people are very stressed about that, having the right keywords and the right profile. It's part of your job search. So in other words, when you want to brand yourself online, of course, you have to be aware that the words that you use will help you or not. So making sure that it's drafted in a certain way with certain words that people will actually pull when they do a search. So you have to think about all the different wording around your field that people will type on a search to find profiles like you. But it's also about your personality, as I was saying. So I don't want people to be too hung up on the wording and on the keywords, especially when they're applying via databases, when they're applying for big companies. that's a huge source of stress for most people. Would I have the right keywords? Will I be eliminated too quickly? I think, as long as you have a nicely presented resume and you answer all the questions that are asked, and depending on the organization, it could be quite a long process. But as long as you do it in the right way and you answer all the different questions, then it's also a search based on the person that's picking the resumes, and you don't have the answers to all the different parameters. So do it in the most professional way of doing it, and then focus also more on, again, the offsite things, building up your network, which 99% of the people I work with still have to develop that part the most. I mean, once people have a resume, they do great at applying and following up on their application. I usually don't have an issue with that. Where I need to be more active with people is more on the other stuff. Do you go to enough events? Do you introduce yourself to? How many people did you introduce yourself to? How many business cards did you get? And that's still not quite natural. And that's where you get the most value, because in the end, everyone has a profile online and everyone has visibility now, but it's more the offsite things that you will do that will make the difference. So all the events that you go to, and also trying to identify people that could be a great network for you. So I hope that answered that question on online visibility. Is the CV now more important than the covering letter? Yeah, thanks, Adam, for asking the question. I think that both are actually important. It depends on where you're applying. So in my background, when I worked in international organizations, people like to read details. So they wanted to see all the applications, including the cover letters. And especially if people were going to work in writing type of functions, they wanted to test that. They wanted to see that there's no mistakes, misspellings, and it's important. It was a very important aspect. However, if you ask recruitment firms, their job is completely different. Their job is just to screen and to manage applications. So they just want to make sure the resume has the minimum requirements to apply with the client. So they're not going to spend as much time on the cover letters. So it's a different process. How to follow up when you apply. So this is a question. I'm sorry, I didn't mention people's names. This is a question from Nastasia. How to follow up when you apply, because sometimes I get told it's not good to be too pushy, and others says it's good to show you're motivated. That's a great question. And as I was explaining earlier with the individual that was looking for work, and she just tried that technique of calling people, and it worked for her, but she did it in a nice way. So it's all about that. It's all about being smart about it. I think no one wants to be pushed or nagged, or it depends on how you address to the person. If you send a lot of emails and they're quite aggressive in the format, or that people can see that you're upset, it's not going to be as effective as if you're saying, hi, I'm just following up. If you have any more questions, don't hesitate. So it's really about how you do it. It's more the diplomatic sense there. But it's okay. It's okay to follow up on applications, and I would definitely suggest everyone to do it, because you never know. People get busy and they get many applications, and it depends also on the culture of the organization. If you're applying for a huge company and they have, a lot of people working in human resources, probably it's going to be hard for you to get to that person, because you will have the phone barrier. So it will be more difficult to push your application. But if you're with a recruitment firm, usually sometimes they accept a call, sometimes they don't, or same thing with email, they may not answer. But at least you try your best to progress your application. So you see which kind of organization, what impact could I have, and how do I communicate with them to be heard, or to get an email, or maybe try to find some time to ask questions with them. Probably if you deal with an agent, meaning a recruitment firm, they will be more open than if you go and try to address directly with the organization. They probably won't have too much time for that. So, and it's also your motivation for the job. I mean, if you know you have everything on the resume that fits, you're convinced, you're the right person for this position, and you're prepared to show your motivation, then you should try. I think you should try. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is that they don't have time, they don't talk to you, but it's okay. I mean, you tried, and you tried in a nice way, so you can't get a negative response from the person, except maybe they don't answer. So that was from Nastasia. Great question about the following up on application. Okay, so I'm trying to see. So before I close the webinar, any last minute question? Again, don't worry if you feel like, oh, I forgot to ask this and it's really important. I will keep answering questions on Meetup for the rest of the day. So if I see a question, I'm not going to be looking at the screen all day, but if I see questions under the Meetup event, I'll reply. I'll give you a reply for it. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you feel now a little bit more advanced in your change of career or change of jobs. So next webinar will be on how to network, especially if it's not your thing. That's going to be a fun one, I think. And lastly, I wanted also to let you know that if you want to have a private Skype call with me, just to test, just to understand a little bit more about your project, and of course, you're welcome to do this with me. You can just send me an email. So thank you very much again. Hope you have a great afternoon and a great weekend. And I will talk to you at the next webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.